My name is Diana Myers, and I was 28 years old the morning my mother showed up to a will reading she wasn't invited to. My parents had disowned me at 13. I'd refused to give my sister my summer scholarship, and for that, they packed my things into a duffel bag and told me I didn't belong. I hadn't spoken to them in 15 years. My Uncle Harold took me in that same week. He raised me, he built me. And when he died in January of 2025, he left behind 12 commercial buildings, a $23.7 million estate, and a will that named me, and only me, as everything. What happened in that conference room on March 14th? What my father had quietly arranged 2 weeks before, I'm still not sure I have words for. But I'll try. This is where we share stories of women who set quiet boundaries, and what happens when family finally notices. If today's story hits close to home, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning Harold died, I was sleeping 3 floors below his condo. Same building on Capitol Hill. Different unit, different lease. I'd moved into mine at 23 and never left. My routine hadn't changed much in 5 years. Black coffee, no sugar, glasses on. The same black-framed brand Harold wore, though I never told him that. Laptop in my work bag next to a brass fountain pen I kept in the inside pocket. I carried it everywhere. I'll tell you about the pen later. I'd been CFO of Myers Property Holdings for exactly 3 months when he passed. Harold had signed the appointment himself, handed me the paperwork across his desk, and said, "You've earned it. Don't make me regret it." That was his version of a ceremony. I didn't have a boyfriend. I didn't have a wide circle. I had 6 tenants I spoke with weekly, an accounting team of 4, and Margaret Whitfield, Harold's attorney of 22 years, who I was starting to think of as the closest thing to a mentor I had left. I hadn't called my mother in 15 years. She hadn't called me either. That was the deal. I didn't have a number for her. She didn't have one for me. Somewhere in Portland, my parents and my older sister Tiffany had continued their lives, and I'd continued mine, and the 274 miles of I-5 between us was as good a wall as any. I'd built a life that took up exactly the space I needed and not 1 inch more. Most mornings, that felt like enough. The morning of January 9th, I walked upstairs to check on Harold and found his bedroom door open, the reading lamp still on, and his body still warm. He'd died in his sleep. He was 71. To understand how I got here, I have to go back to August of 2010. Portland, Oregon. I was 13. I'd been awarded a summer enrichment scholarship at Portland State, a 6-week academic program in math and writing. I'd applied on my own, wrote the essay at the public library after school because my parents didn't have a printer. When the letter came, I taped it to the fridge. 2 days later, my mother sat me down at dinner. Tiffany was 16. She needed the scholarship for her college resume, my mother explained. "You're already smart, honey," she said. "Tiffany needs this more." I said no. My father slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. My mother's eyes went wet on command. I'd seen her do it before, at parent-teacher conferences when she wanted something waived. "If you can't put family first," she said, "you don't belong in this house." I looked at my father. He didn't say a word. Tiffany was already scrolling her phone. I went to my room, packed a duffel bag, took my library card, 2 changes of clothes, and the scholarship letter off the fridge. Slept on my friend Laura's couch that night with the bag under my head. The next morning, Laura's mother made me toast and asked if I wanted to call someone. I said no. Then the phone rang. It was Harold. He was my father's older brother, lived in Seattle, ran a commercial real estate company. I'd met him maybe 5 times at Thanksgiving, but for 2 years I'd been emailing him about books. He'd sent me a reading list once, and I'd kept writing back. He was the only adult in my family who ever asked me what I was reading. "Diana," he said, "pack what you have." He drove down from Seattle that same afternoon. Black sedan, window down, no sunglasses. He parked in front of Laura's house and didn't honk, just waited. I walked out with my duffel bag. He looked at it, then at me. "That everything?" "That's everything." He didn't hug me, didn't give a speech, just opened the passenger door and said, "We're going to Seattle. You can come back if you want. Anytime. But tonight, you're sleeping in a bed. 3 hours up I-5. Mostly silence. Harold played an old jazz station and didn't ask what happened. He didn't badmouth my parents. He didn't tell me everything would be fine. About an hour in, somewhere near Olympia, he pulled into a diner and bought me a grilled cheese and a glass of milk. I ate the whole thing without talking. Back in the car, he said one thing I've never forgotten. I don't have kids, Diana. Never wanted them. But I have a guest room and a spare key, and I'd rather you sleep there than on somebody's couch. I nodded. That was the entire conversation. That night, I stood in his guest room on Capitol Hill, the room that would become mine for the next 10 years, and looked out the window. On clear days, you could see Mount Rainier from that angle, lit pink at sunset. That night, the mountain was hidden behind clouds, but I knew it was there. Harold came to the doorway, leaned against the frame. I've been expecting something like this, he said. I've seen how they are with you at holidays. I just didn't know when. He said goodnight, closed the door, and that was the last time anyone in my family made me feel like I didn't have a place to sleep. 15 years is a long time to compress into a few minutes, but here's what matters. Harold enrolled me at Lakeside School that fall. Private, rigorous, the kind of place where nobody cared who your parents were as long as you showed up prepared. He paid tuition without discussing it. His only rule, your money, your decisions. Mine is mine. On my 14th birthday, he gave me a brass cross fountain pen. Heavy, warm-toned, engraved with his initials, H.M., on the clip. It had been his since 1986. Use it for things that matter, he said. I kept it in my jacket pocket every day after that. I graduated. University of Washington, Foster School of Business. Finance, summa cum laude, 3.94 GPA. Harold didn't come to the ceremony. He said graduations were for parents, and he wasn't trying to be one. But he left a card on my desk at the office the next Monday. It said, "Good. Now do something with it." I did. CPA license at 25, senior financial analyst at Myers Property Holdings at 23. Yes, I started there during college. Director of finance at 26. I learned the portfolio from the ground up. Harold taught me how to read a lease before I could legally sign one. The lease tells you who has the power, he'd say. Read carefully. 3 months before he died, Harold called me into his office and signed my CFO appointment. He used the brass pen, my pen, the one he'd given me, then handed it back. Hold on to this, he said. There's a folder I've left with Margaret. It's for after. I asked what was in it. He shook his head. After. Harold taught me 2 things in 15 years, how to read a balance sheet, and how to keep my mouth shut when I didn't have to speak. The first scare came in 2023. Harold collapsed in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, cardiac arrhythmia. The paramedics got there in 4 minutes. He was back at his desk by Thursday, reading lease renewals like nothing happened. But something had happened. His color changed. He moved slower. He started leaving earlier, which Harold had never done in 40 years of business. By late 2024, the arrhythmia had worsened. 2 hospital stays in November. 1 in December. I took leave from operations and slept on the couch in his condo upstairs, checking on him every 4 hours like the cardiologist instructed. In his last week, he handed me a single sheet of paper with handwritten instructions. His writing was shaky, but legible. Margaret has the will. I trust her. Don't sign anything without her. And Diana, don't let your father anywhere near this. January 9th, 2025, 6:14 in the morning. I found him in his bed with the lamp on, a book open on his chest, a biography of someone I can't remember now, and his face completely still. He'd gone in his sleep. No pain, no struggle. The paramedics said his heart just stopped. He was 71. He'd built Myers Property Holdings from a single duplex he bought in 1982 into a portfolio of 12 commercial buildings worth $23.7 million. He'd never married, never had children. He'd taken in his brother's discarded daughter and given her a desk, a title, and a life. The funeral was small, 30 people. Harold had pre-planned everything, the venue, the music, the guest list. My parents were not on it. But my mother and sister came anyway. They walked in 20 minutes late, wearing black, and my mother started hugging strangers before she even signed the guest book. Sandra Myers has a gift. She can walk into any room and make it about her within 90 seconds. At Harold's funeral reception, she worked the crowd like she was hosting. She hugged the caterer. She clasped the hand of Harold's property manager and said, "He was such a dear man. My dear brother-in-law." She'd met him maybe twice. Tiffany stood near the back, holding her phone low, recording a video she'd later post on Instagram with the caption, "Saying goodbye to a great man." 214 likes. She was 31, married, 2 kids, and still curating her life for strangers. My father wasn't there. Sandra told someone he was working. I heard from a cousin that he'd stayed in Portland. I wasn't surprised. Richard Myers only showed up when there was money to discuss, and nobody had told him the numbers yet. I was standing by the coffee when Sandra found me. She smelled like department store perfume and hairspray. She put both hands on my shoulders and looked me in the eyes for the first time in 15 years. "Honey, blood is blood," she said. "Let's not let the past define us today." I didn't respond. I picked up my coffee, turned, and walked to the other side of the room. Tiffany caught me near the coat rack. "Mom is really hurting," she said. "You should talk to her. I'm sure she'll find a way to express that." Tiffany blinked. I think she expected me to fold. People usually do, with Sandra. That's how it works. Sandra performs grief, and everyone around her adjusts. I didn't adjust. I put on my coat. On my way out, Sandra pressed a piece of paper into my palm, her phone number. Written in the same round handwriting I remembered from grocery lists on the fridge when I was 12. I put it in my pocket. That was a mistake. 3 days after the funeral, I took the elevator to the 14th floor of the Morrison and Sullivan building downtown. The receptionist led me to a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing west. Mount Rainier filled the frame, white and sharp against a January sky. Margaret Whitfield was already seated. Navy suit, reading glasses on a chain, a stack of files arranged in 3 neat rows. She stood when I walked in and shook my hand, with the kind of grip that told you she'd been doing this for decades. "I worked with your uncle for 22 years, she said. "He was the most deliberate man I've ever represented." She sat me down and explained what Harold had arranged. The will reading would not be a private affair. Harold had structured it as a combined event, a celebration of life and a formal executor confirmation. 47 invited attendees, lawyers, accountants, auditors, 2 of his longtime tenants, and representatives from 3 charitable organizations he'd named as contingent beneficiaries. "He designed this on purpose," Margaret said. "He told me his brother would make trouble. He wanted witnesses." Then she placed something on the table between us, a sealed Kraft manila folder, thick with papers, with 5 words written across the front in Harold's handwriting, "Diana, for after." "He left instructions," Margaret said. "You open this only after the funeral, in private, not before." I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. "Harold did not trust your father," she said. "He told me so the day he updated the will." I wanted to ask what that meant, but Harold had taught me something about patience. You don't ask questions when the answer is sitting in your hands. You take it home. You wait. I took the folder home. I didn't open it. Not yet. The text started 3 days later. I was at my desk reviewing a lease renewal for one of our Belltown buildings when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Long message. "Honey, I know things have been hard between us, but family needs to come together right now. We need to talk about Harold's estate. Your father is grieving." I stared at the screen, read it twice, set the phone face down. 20 minutes later, another one. "It's only right. We're family. We can work this out like adults." The next day, a voicemail. Sandra's voice, warm and measured, the same tone she used when she wanted a refund at the supermarket. "Diana, sweetheart, call me back. We should do this together." Then another text. "Your father was Harold's brother. That means something." I didn't respond to any of them. Not one. I saved the number under a contact name I wouldn't accidentally open. Do not open. And turned off notifications. Harold had a saying about people who suddenly remember your name after years of silence. When someone shows up at the door with flowers and no occasion, he'd say, "Check what's behind their back." Sandra had shown up with flowers at the funeral. She'd hugged strangers, kissed cheeks, and called Harold dear. Now she was texting about the estate 3 days later. The flowers were still fresh. The math was already running. I forwarded every message to Margaret with a single note. For the file. Margaret wrote back, "Noted. Keep everything." I did. Every text, every voicemail, every timestamp. I didn't know yet what they'd be worth, but Harold didn't raise me to throw away documentation. The following Friday, I came home at 6:30 to find my parents sitting in the lobby of my building. Sandra was perched on the edge of a bench near the mailboxes, legs crossed, purse in her lap. Richard stood beside her, hands in his pockets, jaw tight, wearing the same flannel jacket I remembered from when I was 12. They looked like they'd been waiting a while. Richard spoke first. "We just want to talk. 5 minutes." I didn't invite them upstairs. I didn't sit down. I set my bag on the floor and kept my keys in my hand. "There's nothing to talk about. If there's anything relevant, the attorney will contact you. Her name is Margaret Whitfield. Morrison and Sullivan." Sandra's face shifted. A flicker of something behind the warmth. Something harder. "Diana, you don't understand. Your father is Harold's brother. He has rights." "He doesn't. Honey." Sandra stood, took a step forward. "Blood is blood. We're still family." I let the sentence sit in the air between us. 15 years since she'd used the word family in reference to me. 15 years since she'd told me I didn't belong in her house. "Margaret Whitfield," I said again. "Morrison and Sullivan. She's the one to contact." I picked up my bag, walked past both of them, and pressed the elevator button. Sandra didn't follow. Richard did. 2 steps, then stopped. As the doors opened, I glanced back. Richard already had his phone out, dialing. I heard him say, "Frank, it's me. We're going to have to move on this." The doors closed. I rode up alone. I didn't know who Frank was, but I'd learned from Harold. When someone names a person you haven't heard of, write it down. I pulled out my phone and typed, "Frank." Richard called him. Friday, 6:45 p.m. Tiffany's approach was different. She went digital. Over the next 4 days, she sent me 14 Instagram direct messages. The first few were warm. "Hey, sister, can we talk? I miss you." The kind of thing that might have worked on someone who hadn't watched Tiffany perform kindness her entire life. By day 2, the tone shifted. "Mom is crying every night. She's devastated." By day 3, "We were kids, Diana. Mom and Dad are older now. They've changed. You're being cruel." Day 4, "If you embarrass our family at that reading, you'll regret it." I didn't respond to a single message. Not one word. Then she showed up at my office building, the Myers Property Holdings headquarters on 2nd Avenue. She walked through the front door and told the receptionist she was my sister. Security stopped her in the lobby. I watched from the 3rd floor window as she argued with the guard for 6 minutes, then left. That afternoon, she posted a story on Instagram. A black screen with white text. "Some people forget where they came from." 200 likes. 38 comments. Mostly heart emojis from people who had no idea what she was talking about. My coworker James saw the post. He didn't say anything. I appreciated that. What I noticed, scrolling back through Tiffany's profile that night for the first time in years, was that she'd been building this narrative long before Harold died. Family first, captions. Group photos where I was conspicuously absent, quotes about forgiveness and sisterhood posted on Mother's Day. She'd turned our estrangement into content. She'd made herself the peacemaker of a war she'd helped start. I closed the app and didn't open it again. The next week, I sat in Harold's old office at the top of the building. It was mine now, technically, but I hadn't moved anything. His leather chair still held the shape of him. His reading glasses sat on the desk next to a stack of lease files and a coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Landlord," which I'd given him as a joke 3 Christmases ago. I opened the portfolio review. 12 buildings, 3 in Sodo, a warehouse, a light industrial complex, and a small retail strip. 4 in Belltown, mixed use, strong rents. 2 on Capitol Hill, one of them our own building. 3 in Pioneer Square, older, character heavy. the kind of properties Harold loved most. Total appraised value, $23.7 million. Net operating income, $1.9 million annually. Harold had built this from a single duplex he bought in 1982 for $67,000. 42 years of patient, deliberate work. I remembered sitting in this same chair at 19, watching Harold explain a lease to me line by line. "The lease tells you who has the power," he said, running his finger down the rent escalation clause. "Read carefully. Every landlord-tenant relationship is a negotiation, and the person who reads the fine print wins." I'd read every lease in this portfolio at least twice. Harold knew that. It's why he promoted me. I closed the binder and noticed something on the desk I'd missed before. Harold's personal notebook, a small leather-bound pad he carried in his breast pocket. I opened it to the last entry, dated January 6th, 3 days before he died. 2 lines in his neat but shaky cursive. "Call Margaret about the Diana folder. She needs to see it before the reading." I set the notebook down, picked up the craft folder from my bag. I'd been carrying it for a week without opening it. Tonight, I decided. I'd open it tonight. 2 days later, I was leaving the Morrison and Sullivan building after a meeting with Margaret about the reading logistics. I took the stairs to the lobby. I always took the stairs, and as I pushed through the stairwell door, I heard a voice I recognized. Richard. My father. Standing near the elevator bank, phone pressed to his ear, talking loud enough that the receptionist was pretending not to listen. "Frank, listen. We just need to file something quick. Undue influence. He was sick the last 6 months. Everyone knows that. We need to get ahead of it before she signs anything." I stopped. Pressed myself against the wall next to a potted fern. Held my breath. A pause. Frank's reply. Muffled. Indistinct. Richard again. "I don't care what it costs. He had no kids. The estate has to come back to family. That's how it works." Another pause. Then Richard lowered his voice. But not enough. "Just have the papers ready by the 14th. That's the reading." He hung up, adjusted his jacket, walked toward the parking garage without looking back. I stood there for a full minute. Then I took the back exit to the street, got in my car, and called Margaret. "Richard is hiring a lawyer," I said. "Someone named Frank. He's planning to file an undue influence claim. He wants it ready by the reading date." Margaret was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Thank you. I'll look into it. Don't do anything else." "I won't." "Diana." "Yes. Your uncle prepared for this. That's why the reading is structured the way it is." She hung up. I sat in the parking garage for 10 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel. Then I drove home and pulled the craft folder out of my bag. I opened it at Harold's desk, 10:45 at night, the desk lamp casting a yellow circle on the walnut surface. Through the window behind me, Mount Rainier was invisible, just black sky and city lights reflected in the glass. The craft folder was sealed with a single strip of packing tape, Harold's handwriting on the front. "Diana. For after." I peeled the tape. Inside were 2 things. On top, a handwritten letter from Harold. 3 pages, dated June 14th, 2024. The same day the will was notarized. His handwriting was steadier then. Clearer. He'd written this when he still had time. Underneath the letter, a stack of paper held together with a rubber band. 11 envelopes. Standard white, business-sized, each with Harold's Seattle address in the center and a Portland return address in the corner. My father's handwriting. I read Harold's letter first. "Diana, I didn't show you these because I didn't want you to feel like something owed. You came to me at 13 with a duffel bag and a library card, and you showed up every single day after that. That was always enough. Your father has been writing to me since the year you arrived. 11 letters in 14 years. Each one asks for money. Some of them mention you, as something to negotiate with. Sandra mentioned Diana might want to come visit if you could see your way to helping us with the mortgage." That's a direct quote from letter number 4. I set the page down, picked up the envelopes, opened them one by one. 11 letters, 11 requests, 2010 through 2024. Some handwritten, some typed. All from Richard, all asking Harold for money, and scattered through them like inventory. My name. Diana. Mentioned 9 times across 11 letters. Always as leverage. I went back to Harold's letter. The last paragraph. Your father gave up on you once, then realized you had value when I had money. I never gave up. That's the difference. Diana, you were never the spare. You were the one who showed up. I read that line 3 times. Then I closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was going to do at that reading. If this story is hitting somewhere that's been quiet a long time, drop a single word in the comments. Just one word. That's enough. And if you're new here and this is the kind of story that gives you space to breathe, go ahead and subscribe. We post these every week. Stories about women who stop explaining and start deciding. I'll see you after the break. I was at Morrison and Sullivan by 7:30 the next morning. Margaret was already there, coffee untouched, reading something on her screen. I placed the craft folder on her desk. She opened it without asking, read Harold's letter in silence, then opened the envelopes, one by one, scanning each letter with the same clinical focus she'd use on a contract dispute. When she finished, she took off her reading glasses and looked at me. This explains a great deal. I want them at the reading, I said. She paused. The will doesn't require their attendance. We could proceed without them. I know, but if they're going to make a scene, and they will, I want 47 witnesses when they do, including you. Margaret studied me for a long moment. Then she pulled a legal pad from her drawer and began writing. I'll send formal invitations by certified mail, she said. They'll know it's official. They'll think it's an opportunity. Good. One more thing. She set the pen down. Has Richard contacted another attorney? You mentioned a name. Frank. Frank. I don't have a last name yet. I'll find out. She slid the craft folder back to me. Bring this to the reading. Don't show it before then. Don't reference it. If they escalate, we use it. If they don't, we file it and move on. I nodded. Diana. Margaret leaned forward. Your uncle designed this reading like a courtroom. Witnesses, documentation, public record. He knew exactly who your father is. He built a wall of people around you before he died. I picked up the folder. It felt different now. Not heavier exactly. More like something loaded. I'm not afraid of them seeing the room, I said. I want them to see the room. Margaret sent the invitations by certified mail the following morning. 4 days later, I got the voicemail. Sandra's voice. Controlled, rehearsed, with that warm, sharp edge she reserved for when she wanted you to think she was being reasonable. Honey, we know what you're trying to do. Your father and I have spoken to a lawyer. We will contest this will if we have to. We'd rather not, but we will. I hope you'll do the right thing before that happens. I played it twice. The second time, I noticed the hesitation at lawyer. She'd practiced the word. She wanted it to sound heavy. It sounded like someone quoting a daytime TV show. I transcribed the voicemail and emailed it to Margaret with a single line. Add to file. Margaret replied within the hour. Noted. By the way, your invitation was hand-delivered to their hotel yesterday. They've RSVP'd. I read that sentence twice. Their hotel. In Seattle. They'd checked in days ago, which meant Sandra and Richard had been in the city the entire week. Not grieving in Portland. Not working, as Sandra had told people at the funeral. They'd driven up and set up camp. Planning. Strategizing. Calling lawyers named Frank. I forwarded the voicemail file to Margaret and asked one question. Do you have a name for the attorney yet? Her reply came at 11:16 that night. Frank Delaney. Solo practice. Tacoma. He's drafted an intake form but hasn't filed anything yet. Frank Delaney. Tacoma. I wrote it down in Harold's notebook, underneath Harold's last entry. It felt like the right place for it. 2 weeks until the reading. Everything was moving, and I hadn't raised my voice once. 1 week before the reading, Margaret walked me through the legal landscape in her office. She closed the door, poured 2 glasses of water, and laid it out flat. The will was notarized and filed with King County Superior Court. Harold's physician had recorded a capacity exam on video 6 days before the signing. Standard practice for high-net-worth estates, Margaret said. But Harold had insisted on it anyway. He wanted it bulletproof. I was named sole heir and sole executor. Margaret explained the difference carefully. Sole heir means you inherit everything. Sole executor means you administer the estate. You decide how, when, and to whom assets are distributed, within the terms of the will. They're two separate authorities. You hold both. She continued. Under Washington state law, once the court confirms the executor, I could petition for something called non-intervention administration. It means you manage the estate without ongoing court supervision, Margaret said. You can sell property, manage funds, distribute assets, all without a judge signing off each time. It's granted when the estate is solvent, and the executor is named in the will. And contesting? 3 grounds, she said. Undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, or fraud. None apply. The will is clean. The video exam is clear. Harold's intent is documented across 12 years of correspondence with this office. She paused. Frank Delaney filed an intake form with the bar 2 weeks ago. He's representing your father. Can he be at the reading? Not unless we invite him. We're not going to. And if they file after? Margaret folded her hands. They can file. They will lose. But it will cost them money, and it will cost the estate time. She looked at me. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared. The night before the reading, I left the Myers property garage at 6 and found Tiffany standing next to my car. She was leaning against the driver's side door of my Audi, phone in hand, angled low, recording. I could see the red dot on the screen from 10 feet away. I just want to talk, she said. One conversation, 5 minutes. I stopped walking. Not on camera, not in a garage. I'm not recording. Tiffany, I can see the light. She lowered the phone but didn't lock it. Fine, can we just... Tomorrow, at the reading, with everyone. Her jaw tightened. You're going to embarrass us, aren't you? I opened the car door. I'm not the one with anything to be embarrassed about. Diana. Her voice cracked. And for half a second, I saw something real. She was scared. She'd been positioned as the favored daughter her entire life. And tomorrow, in a room full of people she'd never met, that position was about to be tested. I almost said something. Almost. But then she lifted her phone again and snapped a photo of my license plate as I pulled out of the space. Just in case, I assumed. Just in case she needed evidence of where I was, or what I drove, or how much my car cost. Tiffany collected information the way Sandra collected sympathy, reflexively, without knowing what she'd use it for. I drove home, called Margaret from the car. Everything's ready, she said. 47 confirmed, court reporter booked, documents organized. If anything unexpected happens, I'll handle it first. You speak when you're ready. Not before. Understood. Get some sleep, Diana. I didn't. 6 a.m. Friday, March 14th, 2025. I was awake before my alarm. I made coffee the same way I always did. Black, no sugar. Poured into the same mug I'd been using for 3 years. I put on my glasses, brushed my teeth. Stood in front of the closet for a full minute before choosing what I already knew I'd wear. A black tailored suit, clean lines, no jewelry, except a small pair of silver studs Harold had given me when I passed my CPA exam. I slid the brass pen into my inside jacket pocket. It sat against my chest. Cool at first, then warm. Heavier than it had any right to be. I picked up the craft folder from the kitchen counter. It held everything now. Harold's letter, the 11 envelopes, and a set of documents Margaret had prepared for the signing. I'd added one thing of my own, a single page with a handwritten note I'd drafted at 2 in the morning, just in case I needed words and couldn't find them. I locked the condo, took the elevator down, drove downtown and parked at the 5th and Madison garage, 4 blocks from Morrison and Sullivan. The walk was quiet. Seattle in March, cold, damp, no rain yet. I could see the tower from 2 blocks away, glass and steel catching the low morning light. 14th floor. I looked up and counted windows. Somewhere in a hotel in this city, my mother was putting on a black dress she'd bought for the occasion. Somewhere, my father was checking his phone, waiting for a call from Frank Delaney. Somewhere, Tiffany was choosing which angle to film from. And I was standing on the sidewalk with a brass pen in my pocket and 15 years of silence behind me. I felt nothing. That surprised me. I walked in. I arrived 30 minutes early. The conference room was already set. 47 chairs arranged in a wide horseshoe around a central table. Name placards at every seat. Harold's instruction, Margaret told me, each one printed in small black type on cream cardstock. At the head of the horseshoe, a single chair with no placard. That was mine. Margaret stood near the window, arranging 3 stacks of documents in order. Behind her, Mount Rainier filled the glass wall, fully visible, snow-lit white against a clearing sky. The mountain looked closer than it usually did. Sharp. Like it had moved overnight. A court reporter was setting up her stenotype near the corner. 2 auditors from Cantor and Loeb sat near the back, reviewing their files. I recognized Beatrice Hartley from the Northwest Children's Fund. She gave me a small nod. David Olson from the Pacific Veterans Trust was reading something on his phone. Catherine Doyle from the Seattle Public Library Foundation was already seated, hands folded. Harold's tenants were arriving in pairs, the woman who ran Pioneer Square Books, the couple who managed the Veterans Co-op in Sodo. People Harold had known for decades, who had signed their leases with him and shaken his hand every quarter. I set the craft folder on the table beside my chair, sat down, adjusted my glasses. Margaret walked over and bent low. "If anything unexpected happens," she said, "I handle it first. You speak when you're ready. Not before." I nodded. "Good." She straightened. "They RSVP'd for 10 o'clock. It's 9:32. 28 minutes. I looked at the mountain through the glass and waited. At 9:55, the conference room was half full. 31 people seated, the rest milling near the coffee station. Then Sandra walked in. She wore the black dress I'd noticed at the funeral, the one she'd bought that week. I could see the price tag peeking from under the collar at the back of her neck. She hadn't removed it. I didn't know if that was carelessness or strategy. Sandra liked to return things. Richard followed 2 steps behind. His suit was too big in the shoulders and too short at the wrists. Rented, I guessed. He'd never owned a suit. His eyes were already scanning the room, moving from person to person, pausing at the exits. Tiffany came last. Phone in hand, low, always low, screen tilted slightly toward the room. Recording, but trying to hide it. Sandra started working the room immediately. She walked up to a woman she'd never met, extended both hands, and said, "I'm Diana's mother. So nice to meet you." The woman, one of Harold's property managers, smiled politely and stepped back. 2 of the charity reps exchanged glances. They hadn't known there was a mother. Sandra moved toward the front. I didn't stand. I didn't acknowledge her. I looked at Margaret and gave a small nod. Margaret stepped between Sandra and the front row. "Mrs. Myers, welcome. Your seats are here." She gestured to 3 chairs in the second row, offset to the right. Sandra paused. "We're family. We should be up front." Margaret's voice was level, polite, final. "These are the assigned seats." Sandra held Margaret's gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she sat. Richard took the seat beside her. Tiffany sat on the end, phone still in hand. 44 people. 3 villains, and 1 folder on the table. The last few minutes before the reading were the worst. Sandra couldn't sit still. She rose from her assigned seat and drifted toward Beatrice Hartley, who was reviewing her program near the coffee table. "You're with the Children's Fund?" Sandra said, extending her hand. Harold loved children. He always wanted a big family. Beatrice shook the hand. Sandra continued without pause. "Yes, Diana is my younger one. We didn't always see eye to eye, you know, but blood is blood." She smiled. The wide, warm smile she used when she wanted someone to feel included in a secret. Beatrice nodded once, turned away, and poured herself more coffee. Across the room, Tiffany had found David Olson. She was talking to him about Harold's legacy while holding her phone at hip level. David, a Marine veteran, 6'2", silver crew cut, looked at the phone, then at Tiffany. "Put that away," he said. "This isn't a show." Tiffany's smile froze. She dropped the phone into her purse. I watched Richard from my seat. He wasn't mingling. He was sitting exactly where Margaret had placed him, phone in his lap, checking the screen every 30 seconds. Twice, he turned to look at the conference room door. Then again. 3 times in 2 minutes. Margaret noticed too. She leaned down to my ear. He's expecting someone. I looked at Richard's face. His knee was bouncing. His eyes kept darting to the hallway. Frank Delaney. He'd been told not to come. He'd told his lawyer to come anyway. I placed my hand flat on the craft folder and waited. At 10:02, Margaret stood, adjusted her blazer, and called the room to order. The room went quiet in layers. The coffee station murmur died first. Then the shifting of chairs. Then the typing from the court reporter's setup. Finally, silence. Margaret stood at the head of the horseshoe, a single leather binder open on the podium. She placed her reading glasses on and didn't look up for 4 full seconds. The room held its breath. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Harold Elias Myers," she began, born July 18, 1953. Deceased January 9, 2025. This will was notarized on June 14, 2024 at this office, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a public notary. She paused, looked at Sandra, then Richard, then Tiffany, then swept her gaze across the rest of the room, then back to the document. The testator left specific instructions regarding the format of this reading. I will quote directly. She adjusted her glasses. "It is my wish that this reading serve as both a celebration of life and a confirmation of fiduciary authority in the presence of those who served alongside me." Sandra shifted in her seat. The leather creaked. Margaret continued with the procedural sections: witnesses, notarization, filing date, standard language. But the way she read it, slow, measured, deliberate, made every sentence feel like a door being locked. I sat with my hands in my lap, the brass pen pressed against my chest. The craft folder lay flat on the table. Richard checked the door again. Margaret turned the page. Margaret read Article 1, Administrative Provisions. Article 2, Specific Charitable Distributions. To the Northwest Children's Fund, 5% of the total estate value. To the Pacific Veterans Trust, 5%. To the Seattle Public Library Foundation, 5%. Beatrice Hartley nodded. David Olson made a small note. Catherine Doyle placed her hand over her heart. Warm reactions, quiet gratitude. Then Margaret turned the page. Article 3. I hereby designate my niece, Diana Marie Myers, as sole heir to the residue of my estate, including all real property, business holdings of Myers Property Holdings, LLC, and personal effects. She paused. Let the sentence settle. I further designate Diana Marie Myers as sole executor of this estate, with full authority for non-intervention administration as permitted under RCW 1168. 44 heads turned toward me. I kept my hands in my lap. Margaret continued, slower now. This designation is made in full awareness that my brother, Richard James Myers, is a surviving sibling. She looked directly at Richard. He is intentionally excluded from inheritance. This exclusion is not made in error. The room inhaled. The auditors wrote. The court reporter typed. Beatrice Hartley set down her coffee. The morning sun had shifted across Mount Rainier through the glass, the peak now bright white, almost blinding. Sandra's face changed. I watched it happen in real time. The pleasant mask dissolved in 3 seconds. The smile dropped. The color left her cheeks. Her jaw went rigid. Richard stood. This is a mistake. Margaret, without raising her voice. It is not a mistake. Please sit. Tiffany reached for her phone, started recording openly, held it up. No pretense. Margaret turned to her. Phone's away. This is a probate proceeding. Tiffany hesitated, then lowered the phone. Margaret looked at the room. We will now proceed to the executor confirmation. That moment, when the room goes quiet and every person in it realizes what just happened, that's why I share these stories. If you've ever waited for someone to read the truth out loud about you, I see you. Keep watching. What happened next is the part that doesn't usually get told. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Sandra stood before Margaret finished the sentence. This is fraud. Her voice cut across the room like a slap. He was sick. He didn't know what he was doing. She manipulated him. She's been manipulating him since she was 13 years old. The auditor in the back row looked up from his file. The court reporter kept typing. Every keystroke echoed in the silence that followed. Sandra turned to the room. She addressed them like a jury. You don't know what happened. She left our family. She ran away as a child, and Sandra pointed at me. She isolated my brother-in-law for 15 years. He had no children of his own. She took advantage of a sick old man. Nobody spoke. Beatrice Hartley set her pen down. David Olson folded his arms. Sandra's voice climbed higher. We're his family. His real family. I raised that girl for 13 years. I changed her diapers. I drove her to school. And this is what we get? Her voice cracked on the last word. For a half second, just a half second, I saw something underneath the performance. Sandra believed it. She genuinely believed she was owed something for the years she'd spent raising a daughter she later threw away. Her math made sense to her. 13 years of motherhood equaled a share of the estate. The logic was broken, but it was hers, and she'd lived inside it for so long she couldn't see the walls. I stayed seated, hands in my lap. I didn't speak, didn't lean forward, didn't blink. Margaret raised one hand, palm flat. Mrs. Myers, please sit down. You will have an opportunity to speak after the reading is concluded. Sandra didn't sit. I'm not sitting until I get answers. She stole him from us. She stole this. Margaret looked at me. I shook my head. Not yet. Richard rose from his chair like a man who'd been rehearsing. My brother was a sick man, he said. The last 6 months of his life, he could barely walk to the kitchen. Diana was the only person with access to him. She controlled who he saw, what he signed. That's undue influence. That's grounds for contest. Margaret let him finish. Then she adjusted her glasses and spoke with the same tone she'd used to correct a filing error. Mr. Myers, the legal standard for will contest in Washington state is not preference. It is one of 3 grounds: undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, or fraud. She lifted a document from the table. This will was notarized on June 14, 2024. Harold's physician conducted a capacity examination on June 8, 6 days prior. The examination was recorded on video and is archived with this office. She set the document down. The testator's intent is documented across 12 years of correspondence with this firm. Additionally, the notarization was witnessed by 2 independent parties and a public notary. None of the 3 grounds for contest are supported by the factual record. Richard's jaw tightened. We have a lawyer. He'll handle this. Margaret tilted her head slightly. Yes, Frank Delaney. Solo practice Tacoma. We're aware. The room shifted. I could feel it. A collective recalibration. Like 44 people adjusting their understanding of what was happening in this room at the same time. Richard blinked. How do you... We received notice of his intake filing yesterday, Margaret said. As a professional courtesy, Mr. Delaney called to confirm his intent to file on your behalf. A silence fell, the kind that fills a room from the corners inward. Then someone knocked on the conference room door. The door opened slowly. A man in his mid-40s stepped in. Briefcase in one hand, the other adjusting a tie that didn't quite match his jacket. He had the look of someone who'd expected a small room and 4 chairs. Not a horseshoe of 47 seats, a court reporter, and 3 charity representatives staring at him. Frank Delaney. Tacoma. Solo practice. He stopped 2 steps inside the doorway. His eyes moved from Margaret to the auditors to the documents on the table to the court reporter's fingers still moving across the keys. Then to Richard. Margaret didn't miss a beat. Mr. Delaney, welcome, please come in. She gestured to an empty chair near the wall. We were just discussing the procedural grounds for contest. If you'd like to review the will on behalf of your client, I can provide a copy. She slid a bound document across the table toward the empty chair. Frank looked at it. Looked at the room. Looked at his briefcase like it weighed 80 pounds. He sat. Opened the document. Read 3 pages in silence while the room watched. Then he closed it and turned to Richard. His voice was low, but in a room that quiet, every syllable carried. Richard, we need to talk. Richard leaned forward. Just file what we discussed. Richard. Frank set the document down. We need to talk. Outside. Sandra cut in. What's the problem? You said... Frank held up a hand. Mrs. Myers. I was told this was a private family reading. He gestured at the horseshoe, the auditors, the charity reps, the court reporter. This is a probate proceeding. And the factual record, he tapped the will, does not support what I was briefed on. Richard's face went white, the same shade Sandra's had turned 4 minutes earlier. I stood, not fast, not angry. I placed both hands flat on the table, pushed my chair back, and rose the way Harold used to at the start of a quarterly review, deliberate, unhurried, like the room would wait, because I was the one standing. Margaret stepped aside without a word. I opened the craft folder, removed Harold's letter, 3 handwritten pages, held it up so the room could see the handwriting before I read a word. My uncle left me this letter the day he signed his will, I said. June 14th, 2024. He wrote it in his office. I opened it 2 months ago, alone, in the same chair where he used to sit. I read the letter aloud, all 3 paragraphs. My voice was steady. I'd practiced it once at 3 a.m., standing in my kitchen. I read it the way Harold would have wanted, clear, no performance, no pauses for effect. When I reached the last paragraph, I slowed down. Diana, you were never the spare. You were the one who showed up. I let the sentence land. Then I set the letter down and picked up the stack of envelopes, held them in one hand. These are 11 letters my father mailed to my uncle between 2010 and 2024. Each one asking for money. Several mention me, as something to negotiate with. My uncle kept them. He didn't show me. He didn't want me to feel like a debt. Sandra opened her mouth. Diana, don't. I looked at her, leveled, quiet. Mom, I'm not finished. She sat back. I set the envelopes on the table. My family didn't lose me. They gave me up. And then they spent 14 years trying to sell me back to the brother they envied. The brother who took me in anyway. I looked at Sandra, then Richard, then Tiffany. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not interested in reconciliation. Blood was never the problem. Choice was. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out Harold's brass pen, uncapped it, signed the non-intervention administration paperwork Margaret had placed at my seat. The pen clicked against the walnut table when I set it down. If you want to file something, I said, file it. The will is sound. Margaret will represent the estate. You will be billed for our legal costs. I sat down. The pen lay on the table between us, brass catching the morning light. Sandra cried. But this time, nobody reached for a tissue. Beatrice Hartley looked away. David Olson studied his hands. Catherine Doyle wrote something in her notebook and closed it. The court reporter typed the last line and paused, fingers hovering. Tiffany's hand moved toward her purse, toward the phone, then stopped. She'd seen the court reporter. She'd seen the auditors. She'd seen 44 people watching her reach for a camera in a room full of legal witnesses. She folded her hands in her lap instead. Frank Delaney stood. He straightened his tie, picked up his briefcase, and turned to Margaret. I'll be withdrawing as counsel by Monday. Margaret. Send the notice to my office. Frank walked out without looking at Richard. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Richard took Sandra's arm and helped her up. She was still crying, loud, shaking sobs. But the performance had lost its audience. Nobody moved to comfort her. Nobody spoke. Tiffany followed them out. She paused at the door, turned back, and looked at me. I couldn't read the expression. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. She left without saying a word. The remaining 44 people sat in their seats. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Then Beatrice Hartley raised her hand. I'd like to thank Diana, on behalf of the Children's Fund, for honoring Harold's wishes. A small sound, 6 or 7 people clapping softly, the kind of applause that sounds like agreement. I closed the folder, set the pen on top, and let the room breathe. The room emptied slowly. People came up one by one, a handshake, a quiet word, a nod. David Olson squeezed my shoulder and said, Your uncle was a good man. Catherine Doyle said, We'll be in touch about the foundation disbursement. Beatrice Hartley said nothing, just held my hand for 3 seconds and left. The auditors packed their files. The court reporter saved her transcript, closed her case, and wheeled out. The caterer collected the untouched pastry trays. By 10:50, it was just Margaret and me. She poured 2 glasses of water and set one in front of me. I hadn't realized how dry my throat was until I drank half of it in one go. "Your father will file something," she said, sitting across from me. "Frank won't be the lawyer. Someone else might. Let them. The will is sound, they have no standing, but it'll take time, 90 days, maybe more, and they'll lose." "I know." She took off her glasses, set them on the table. "Harold told me something once, about 6 years ago, at the end of a long meeting about his estate plan. I'd asked him why he was leaving everything to you. Not because I questioned it, but because the law required me to document his reasoning." I waited. He said, "Margaret, I've built 12 buildings and a company, but the thing I'm proudest of walked into my guest room with a duffel bag when she was 13 and never once asked me for anything." I looked at the table, then at the window. Mount Rainier in the afternoon light. The same mountain I'd seen from my bedroom that first night, hidden behind clouds, but there. I picked up the craft folder and slid it into my work bag. It had a permanent place now. Not Harold's office. Mine. "Go home," Margaret said. "Sleep. The estate will be here Monday." I stood, shook her hand, walked out of Morrison and Sullivan and into the Seattle afternoon. 6 months later, I was sitting in Harold's old chair, my chair, reviewing the close on a Pioneer Square mixed-use building, $4.2 million, my first acquisition as sole executor. Harold would have liked the deal. Older building, strong bones, the kind of property that rewarded patience. Richard filed his contest petition through a new attorney in April. The court dismissed it within 90 days. No grounds, no evidence, no standing. The estate billed him $84,000 in legal defense costs. The wage garnishment on his auto shop started in August. Sandra sent one final letter in September. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope, the same round loops from grocery lists when I was 12. I didn't open it. I filed it in my desk drawer, next to Harold's notebook, and closed the drawer. Tiffany deleted her Instagram in July. I didn't find out until James mentioned it over coffee. I didn't look it up to confirm. The portfolio stood at 12 buildings, 13 now, with a total value just north of $28 million. Harold had left me a company. I intended to run it the way he taught me. Read carefully, speak when necessary, and never sign anything without Margaret. I picked up the brass pen from its place on the desk. The HM engraving had worn smooth on one side from years in my pocket. I uncapped it and started writing a letter, not to anyone in particular. Just to get the words down while they were still clear. Some things you write for the file, some things you write for yourself. Here's what Harold taught me. In those 15 years between the night I packed a duffel bag and the morning the will was read, family is not who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when you have nothing and stays anyway. And once you understand that, really understand it, the people who walked away when you were 13 can never quite reach you again. That's not bitterness. That's not revenge. That's a boundary. And a boundary, it turns out, is its own kind of wealth. That was Diana's story. 15 years of silence, 1 folder, 47 witnesses. If this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.